Welcome. Today's lesson is on the joint venture, subcontracting and partnership process, a professional code of conduct. This code of conduct has been written by UNIDO. It's very important, and this lesson is dedicated to describe each point of this professional code of conduct. The chapters of the code of conduct is first mutual obligation, obligation of the customer, main contractor, towards the supplier, subcontractor, obligation of the supplier, subcontractor, towards the customer, main contractor, and obligation of national administrations. Last chapter, obligation of industrial subcontracting and partnership exchange, the SPX. So let's start from mutual obligation. We have to consider mutual obligation at the time of negotiation of the contract, and also we have mutual obligation during the performance of the contract. So now we consider mutual obligation at the time of the negotiation of the contract. First of all, it regards the definition of the subcontracting relationship in clear and precise terms. This is very important in order to have an identical understanding of the problems of the obligations. We can have a different understanding, especially when the contract is between companies in different countries. When the contract is between an international big group and a local company in emerging country or in a developing country. So these two different kinds of company may have different ways to consider obligations, to consider activities, to consider the relationships itself, the characteristics of the contracts itself. So the definition of the contractual relationship has to be very clear, very precise, in order to be sure as much as it's possible that the two parties have the same understanding of the problems of the obligations. So it's also important that the subcontracting relationship in the contract we have the definitions of all the elements and the conditions for future orders, and definitions of terms in technical specification or terms of reference. So it's also important to have a technical specification and to describe in a clear way all the elements and conditions of future orders. Another key point is the definition of important clauses of the contract. First of all, identification of the contract, which means duration of the contract. Duration may be fixed or indefinite term. A period of notice should be specified. The starting time, the identity of the parties has to be specified. Sometimes also may be important to have a preamble which show clearly the reasons for the contract, for the relationships. definition of the work, the product, the service, the purpose of the contract. So stipulate the transaction very clearly. Definition of important clauses of the contract. Again, a point is obligations of the main contractor, the client. Obligations of the subcontractor, the supplier. These obligations have to be described very clearly, and again, both the client and the supplier have to be the same understanding of their reciprocal obligations. Delivery terms have to be specified, and the arrangements for the delivery of the product. Arrangements can regard frequency during a certain period of time, or if it's just in time, for example. Means of transport, type of packaging which has to be used by the supplier, terms of transfer of ownership or and of risks. This is very important when the relationship, when the supplier and the client are located in different countries, or at least when the supplier's plant and client's plant are located in different countries. So terms of transfer of ownerships and risk. Other clauses of the contract which have to be defined: acceptance of the work, penalties which have to be paid by the supplier, or some particular condition by the client. Calculation and adjustment of price, reference to a possible indexation clause, for example. This is very important because the cost of production for the supplier can change during the time, and so the price which the client recognizes to the supplier can become not suitable because of the change of the cost of production, or also the cost of some relevant input. So how to adjust the price when the cost of inputs or the production costs, generally speaking, change in a relevant way. So also who decide how to adjust the price, or which are the automatic mechanisms in order to adjust price. And so there might be useful also to have a kind of indexation clause in order to link the price to the rate of inflation or the increase of the cost of some inputs. Terms of payment and payment guarantees. So when the payment is due, what instrument of payment will be used or are admitted by the parties. Payment by installment. So these differences are very relevant, especially because the supplier, when it is a small or medium company, can have some financial problems, can need cash in order to invest to produce, and so terms of payment, when the payment is due, and the penalties if the client doesn't respect the terms of payment are also very important. Tax regime. main contractors' trademarks and brands, subcontractors' patents and know-how, confidentiality, act of God and force majeure, and contingencies clause. Of course, tax regime depends on the legal system in the country where the contract is developed. Main contractors' trademarks, brands, and subcontractors' patents and know-how, how they are protected. Confidentiality, which regards the relationship between the parties during the enforcement of the contract, and how to manage very particular, very specific conditions that can happen during the enforcement of the contract because of force majeure or because of some contingent condition. Termination of the contract, so which specific condition which determine the termination of the contract, the assignment of the contract, notification, the applicable law. Settlement of disputes, judicial and non-judicial settlement of disputes between the parties. Entry into force, contract documents, identity of signatories to the contract, and the verification of powers of these signatories. So it's very important that we have a clear definition of very specific issues. We see the identity, who can sign the contract, and how do we verify that person has the power to sign the contract, for example. Are very specific issues, but very relevant. And how to settle disputes. Of course, the reciprocal convenience is to avoid dispute and in any case to solve in the quicker and easier way. So how to settle through non-judicial ways. Because of course this is relevant because it can increase the transaction costs. Also we have mutual obligations during the performance of the contract. So we previously discussed mutual obligation at the time of negotiation. I mean, all that issues were relevant during the negotiation of the contracts, but also we have we have to consider some obligation during the performance of the contract. So development of a relationship of trust between the partners based on, first of all, based on mutual information, and second, greater cooperation and better communication. So it's very important to have some kind of obligation that can help, or we may say can force, the development of a mutual relationship of trust between the partners. So in some obligation to exchange information, and some kind of obligation that can develop, can increase the attitude to cooperate and to communicate, again, to exchange information. Also, during the performance of contracts, can be relevant to develop secure and independent relationships, so mutual obligation about the development of a secure and independent relationship. We also have to consider obligation of the customer towards the supplier, so some specific obligation that the customer has towards the supplier. The customer is the main contractor while the supplier is the subcontractor. We have, first of all, obligation of careful selection, make or buy decision of the main contractor, and take account of economic factors and human factors also. So the supplier has to be carefully selected. The customer has to evaluate if it's the option to buy a certain kind of input from an external supplier is better, is more convenient than the option of producing that input internally. So the famous make or buy trade-off. And of course, in the selection of the supplier, economic, organizational, managerial factors have to be taken in consideration, have to be evaluated in order to understand if the supplier can be really can have the conditions to supply properly. Also, there is an obligation to inform about the technical aspects of the order and about the financial aspects. Also, from the point of view of the supplier, it is important that the customer, the main contractor, is financially viable, so has a sound financial condition, and so the main contractor is able to pay for the supply, and maybe also to help the supplier to invest in order to have the proper conditions to produce. The capability of the subcontractor to face required investment also. Obligation of stability and security. The main contractor should try to guarantee the subcontractor stability of the orders. This is very relevant, again, when the subcontractor, when the supplier is a small company in a developing country. So the chance to have a good stability of the orders is very important in order to plan the investment, to be financially viable for the banks, and to be able to organize production activities in an effective way. There might be also a preference clause, so priority to the subcontractor at the same quality of the offer. There is an obligation of control. The control relates, of course, to the quality of the product, and again, obligation of confidentiality. Obligation to pay within a reasonable time. Again, the financial issue is very relevant, very delicate for a small supplier, and obligation of participation of the main contractor in development and investment. This means providing the subcontractor with the technical support and maybe also financial support, while at the same time avoiding any interference in the governance of the supplier. So it's very important to underline the supplier, the subcontractor, remains independent, autonomous. It is an independent company, autonomous, but at the same time it benefits from the support, from the technical and financial support given by the customer, by the main contractor. And this is very important in order to make the subcontractor, the supplier, competitive, and let it develop and strengthen its capabilities. On the other side, it is also relevant for the main contractor, because if the main contractor helps the subcontractors to develop, to strengthen its productive capacity, its technical competencies, its managerial competencies, also it can have it can strengthen the main contractor at the end strengthen its international network and its external partners, which, as we said in previous lessons, are very relevant to make international companies very competitive at global level. So, it can be an obligation of the customer. Sometimes also it depends on the relevance of the subcontractor. It depends on its potentialities. It depends on the strategies that the main contractor has in the country of the subcontractor. But it's it is quite common that we have some obligation of the customer to of the main contractor to provide the subcontractor with technical and financial support. It is quite frequent when the contract is a long-term contract, or at least a medium-term contract. So the two parties, the main contractor and subcontractors, are interested in developing a long-term relationships, a long-term kind of alliance. Now, we consider the obligation of the supplier towards the customer, so the obligation of the subcontractor towards towards the main contractor. Also here we have the obligation to decide carefully, to so consider his ability to respond to the offer. So the subcontractor should really evaluate if it's a real concrete capability to satisfy main contractor's needs. To be very honest, we could say, and weigh up the benefits and the obligations. Of course, during negotiations, the subcontractors can ask for a kind of support, for, we said before, a kind of technical support or financial support. So the subcontractor can say, okay, I have some liabilities, I have some difficulties, I have the potential, I want to become a subcontractor, I want to invest, I want to develop my capabilities, my organization, but I need some help. And this help can become part of the negotiation, of course, between the main contractor and subcontractor. And the main contractor, as we said, can recognize these needs and can help the supplier to overcome its difficulties during time and during the performance of the contract. Proper performance of the contract, so of course the supplier has obligation regarding the quality, and so description of the work, products, standards to be met, and this is a key point because usually an international client, an international company which is a main contractor has to meet international standards, very high quality level, very high standards, and so of course the local subcontractor has to meet the same standards, compliance with the terms of reference and technical specification. And obligation of confidentiality. This obligation is particularly relevant when the main contractor's instructions are not protected by patents. Obligation of confidentiality, on the other side, has to take in consideration that some kind of contract with the companies, with suppliers in developing countries are also aimed to develop some spin-offs. I mean, from the point of view of the local company, of the local government. Obligation to provide advice and technical assistance, and this kind of obligation is relevant when the subcontractor is responsible for the design of or trials or the development of prototypes for its specific markets. So in these cases the subcontractor can provide advice and technical assistance to the main contractor because the subcontractor should have or really has a better knowledge of the specificities of the local markets, of the needs of local clients. Obligation to keep up to date with technical advances, so the subcontractor has to invest in technology to develop knowledge. Obligation to develop an independent industrial strategy. So the subcontractor should develop a specific and independent industrial policy. We also have obligation of national administrations. This obligation is particularly relevant in developing and emerging countries. Obligation to prepare and implement the regulations necessary for the development of subcontracting. So it's important. I mean, these obligations are aimed to promote the potential for subcontracting in the local in the country. Of course, we are talking about international subcontracting. I mean, subcontracting between international companies and local companies. And so the national administrations, national agencies have to promote the better local conditions for the negotiation and for the enforcement of this kind of international contract. Also, obligation to provide technical assistance and financial support to local companies. We said it may happen that it's the main contractor that provide technical assistance or financial support to the subcontractor, but in other cases it might be that is the governmental agency or the national administration that provide this technical assistance in order to make local companies a good potential subcontractor of main contractors, which are usually international companies. To encourage also public companies, state-owned companies to subcontract, to be subcontractor, and also to increase transparency and open public tenders to small and medium companies and offer these companies the facilities for the purpose. Obligation of industrial subcontracting and partnership exchanges. Subcontracting and partnership exchange relies on a code of conduct under which it must build a relationship of integrity and impartiality with its member in a framework of confidentiality. So an ethical code of conduct should be observed, and industrial subcontracting and partnership exchange also seeks to promote the application of national codes of good conduct in subcontracting and to offer subcontractors technical and legal assistance. To introduce a non-judicial procedure for settlement of disputes by acting directly as a mediator and by entrusting the dispute to an arbitrator. So industrial subcontracting and partnership exchanges can act in order to make the contract between and the relationships, the alliances between international companies and local companies easier, more effective. They also act in order to reduce the transaction costs and to solve the dispute between the parties. Thank you.